At some point after I do a little introduction, Alex, I will turn it over to you, make you the host, which will allow you to show whatever you want to show. Okay. Uh,
Great. Thank you.
so this is the Nonprofit Development Center of Southern New Jersey's one, two, three, four, five, six, seventh needs assessment Zoom call. Uh, these are all following on the second of two region-wide summits. This second one occurring on March 12th at Rowan, where approximately 240 NPO leaders from South Jersey got together to discuss how to make South Jersey the most NPO friendly region in the country by 2030. One of the things that that group concluded would be helpful would be to have needs assessment sessions on a variety of topics or subject silos, whatever you want to call them, um, in anticipation over the next 18 months in anticipation of meeting again in 2026 on a region-wide basis. So we have had, beginning on July 10th, we've had sessions on transportation, employment, faith-based organization activities, mental health and substance use, food access, and today we have housing, and we have one. Hello.
I'm having trouble with the passport and I have to keep on texting me too.
Well, I have 8 people on the call, Nicole. I'm not sure what to tell you. I got in using the URL, but you can use this meeting code 842-3166-1166 and the pass
Hold on, wait a minute, 1 second. What's the meeting code, please?
8423 166 1166.
1166. Okay.
And the passcode is 414620. And now I have to go back to
Okay, the passcode, that's why. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. So I apologize. That was our executive director, Nicole Nance. So the problems in getting access are universal. And in any event, we have one more scheduled session coming up on access to affordable healthcare on December 12th, and then we will begin the new year on subjects such as literacy, veterans, environment, and so on. We're fortunate today, as you all know, since you're on the call, to have Alex Staropoli, who has, although she appears to be young, a long and distinguished career in terms of working in the field of housing. She was suggested to us by our friend, the executive director of the Walter Rand Institute, Mavis. Mavis, I always stumble. I'm sorry. Mavis Asidue Frimpong. Is that close enough?
Yes,
All right. I'm sure it's not right, but it's close enough.
it's fine. Good. Thank you.
You're very indulgent. I appreciate that. So, my name is Mike Willman. I am the current chair of the Nonprofit Development Center. I appreciate all you being on the call. If you would be nice enough, if I haven't asked you already, to put your email address in the chat. Let's see, Alex, I will make you the host. And we are limiting these sessions as best we can to 1 hour. We hope to have follow-up sessions in the new year based on what we learn. The ultimate goal is to come away with what I will call a handful of suggestion. I'm sorry. What I'm going to do, Alex, you're now the host. I'm going to mute myself and answer these calls. Okay. You're on.
Sure. Thank you. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. Let me put in presentation mode. Great. Thanks, Mike. And thank you all for being here. Sorry about the meeting link confusion. Hopefully others will be able to join or figure it out. But so before we jump into sort of discussion, I wanted to give us some framework and contextualize where we are in terms of housing in New Jersey You're seeing the slides on the transportation meeting. Not the housing issues in South Jersey. Let me
Right.
see.
I think it's probably just another window.
Yeah, but it's weird because on my screen, hold on my screen, I'm seeing the housing issues. Okay, hold on. Let's see. You would think in 2024 there wouldn't be so many technical difficulties. Okay. What about now?
Perfect.
Okay. Um, so yeah, so to contextualize just where we are with housing in South Jersey and sort of in New Jersey and then South Jersey specifically, to lay some foundation before we jump into sort of what are we seeing as the needs. And just for folks, there's a few people on this call that I don't know. So just so you all know, a little bit about me. I'm an attorney by training, but I've spent my entire career in the policy space, really working at the intersection of racial justice and public health. So I really look at everything with a systems lens, and how are our systems working or not working for people. So I spent time specifically working in the criminal legal system space, in the public health space, and then also in the housing space. Which I think is helpful framing, just so you all know where I'm coming from. So today we'll talk a little bit about the goal and purpose of this meeting, with Mike went through already. We'll talk about the housing landscape and then spend most of our time in discussion. So again, Mike talked about this. There was the summit. Housing was a top issue. This is the first of a series of meetings on housing to ultimately get to some actionable steps that we can take. So before we dive into some of the housing data sort of landscape in Jersey, I think it's helpful to talk about the housing continuum to make sure they're all sort of understanding that housing is on a continuum, starting from homelessness all the way up to market housing. Transitional housing is a space that's sort of, I would say, in flux currently. There's some different feelings around transitional housing, but really thinking through, people can be homeless, they can be without a home. They can be in sort of our shelter, congregate care setting in emergency shelters. They could be in transitional housing, supportive housing, where they're most of the time in a permanent housing situation, but getting services, community housing, affordable housing, and then market rate housing. And this is a little misleading because market rate housing can also be affordable housing. But you get the gist, sort of that there's this full continuum. There are issues within all of these spaces, including in market housing. And so just thinking through that when we're talking about issues, also thinking about what type of housing, and who are the people that we're talking about. And then I think it's also important just to note that there are sort of, when we're talking about housing issues, there's brick and mortar housing, that, there are a host of issues with sort of the need for additional housing. And then there are also housing subsidies, right? So we're talking about voucher programs and things that help pay for housing. And that those vouchers can be used in some of these settings, not in others. And so just thinking about there's sort of those two pieces, I think is important. And then the other thing I wanted to note, that's unique to New Jersey that I think is important, also to level set, is that New Jersey is one of the only states in the country that has an affordable housing framework that is rooted in our Constitution, that actually stems from South Jersey. So there was a case that came out of Mount Laurel in the 70s that created what's known today as the Mount Laurel Doctrine. You will often hear folks talking about affordable housing in New Jersey. And most recently, there was a bill passed last year to sort of set up the framework for the next 10 years of affordable housing, but essentially the law requires municipalities in New Jersey to build affordable housing. And again, like I said, we are one of the only states in the country that has a framework that requires housing to be built in that way. For folks that are joining us, we're just sort of laying the groundwork for housing. Apologies for the confusion with the link. If you could put your name and contact information in the chat. Okay, so moving on, I think it's really important to start this conversation with understanding that there is tons of data and research on the fact that housing stability is tied to almost every single indicator of mental and physical health, as well as economic outcomes. And you can think about this on the individual, the family, and the community level. So we know that when people have a place to, sorry, I'm just admitting people at the same time. When people have a place to sleep, a place to call home that is safe, where they can afford to pay their rent, it is free from health hazards. We see significant improvement in all of these indicators of well-being. So I like to think of housing as health and opportunity. And then I think the important context of this conversation as well is that we know in our country, there were intentional policies to segregate by race and class. And the history of those policies still impacts what we see today. And so significant racial and economic disparities in New Jersey are largely tied to residential segregation. And so it's important context when we think about what are the solutions and how do we sort of dismantle the structures that have caused inequality across the board. Okay. So some numbers. Every year in New Jersey, there's a point in time count. The numbers for the 2024 point in time count were recently released in October. The actual count happens in January. So these are numbers from January. Overall, New Jersey homelessness increased by 24% between 2023 and 2024. You can see here, I included the data from the Southern New Jersey counties. Some of you may be familiar with the continuums of care, which are federally required. I won't go into much detail about that, but they're the continuums of care that coordinate access to homeless vouchers. And so in the Southern New Jersey COC, which is these 4 counties, it increased by 16%. Ocean County saw a 28% increase, so more than the state wide increase, which is significant. Burlington County saw an 8% increase. Atlantic actually experienced a decrease, and Salem had a 31% increase. Again, you can see Salem and Ocean experiencing increases larger than the statewide increase. And then you can see the trends over time from 2021 to 2024, what we've seen in terms of the total count and then sheltered and unsheltered homeless. This slide shows the disproportionate impact of homeless people, or the disproportionate number of homeless people by race. So you can see the yellow bars show the percent of the population in the general population, the percent of the race in the general population, versus the green bar is the percent of that population in poverty and the percent of that population in experiencing homelessness. So you can see that for Black people in New Jersey, non-Hispanic Black people in New Jersey, they are significant disproportionality in terms of the representation in our general population, 12%, but 48% experiencing homelessness. And similarly, for the Hispanic Latino population, you can see, almost 22% represented in our general population, but almost 35%, almost like around 23%. So still that disproportionality. And you can see the disproportionality in the poverty rate is a little bit higher in the Latino population as well. So talking through just affordable housing a little bit, diving a little bit deeper. As I mentioned, New Jersey has this affordable housing framework, which has put us ahead of the curve compared to other states in building affordable housing, but we still are experiencing a significant shortage. And then with rising rents, as I'm sure a lot of you in this space know, the voucher amounts are frequently not enough to cover the rent. And so people are still having difficulty finding units. I put this link here for folks when we circulate the slides. So the affordable housing income limits that are helpful to see based on household size, what folks would be eligible for. And then the fourth round affordable housing numbers, which again, as I mentioned, recently came out, and you can look there and see by county and then by municipality, what does the Department of Community Affairs in New Jersey see as the number of units that each municipality has to build over the next 10 years to meet the affordable housing needs of the state. Oh, sorry. And then these numbers are taken from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, does a report every year that looks at what the needs are in each state and sort of what the gaps in housing availability are. So you can see here that New Jersey, their estimate is that we are over 200,000 units short for extremely low income renters. So that's the lowest of the low when we're sort of looking at income, which really means that we are, much higher, right? Because we know that there are folks in sort of the low income and moderate income county categories that are also not that we also don't have enough units for. So there's a significant deficit there. And then I just wanted to lay out a few other issues in sort of the housing space before we dive into conversation and facilitated conversation. So I think one of the things also in the housing space to keep in mind that even if New Jerseyans are able to find housing, we see high numbers of housing discrimination as well in New Jersey, even though we have strong protections. We actually have New Jersey's law against discrimination is one of the strongest laws against discrimination in the country, goes beyond federal protections. And we also have the Fair Chance in Housing Act, which is specific to protecting individuals who have a prior criminal record. But despite those laws, obviously, we still see discrimination happening and people being kept out of homes because of that. Some of you might have heard of source of lawful income protections. That's a part of the law against discrimination, but just says that people can't be discriminated based on how they are going to pay rent. So we often see this play out with voucher holders, where landlords will say, we don't accept vouchers, which is illegal and against the law. So I think there's a sort of know your rights piece here, but then also a landlord education piece and enforcement, of course, as well. And then I think, I'm sure you all know this too well, but as people are sort of living on the edge, as we're seeing costs of living go up, any small crisis can cause people to fall behind on rent and could lead to eviction. There has been a lot of work in the tenant rights space in the last few years, really since COVID. And there's been an investment by the state in some of our law schools, particularly Rutgers and Seton Hall, and providing access to counsel for people who are experiencing landlord-tenant issues. And a recent report by a coalition of advocates, including those clinics, found that 69% of eviction complaints filed by landlords in New Jersey contained at least one legal deficiency. So really sort of demonstrating the sort of power of landlords, this sort of unchecked system, particularly when we pair it with this 97% number of tenants who don't have a lawyer to defend them in landlord tenant court. So I'm sure folks have heard of right to counsel, right? In the criminal legal system space, folks have a right to counsel. You have a public defender assigned to you if you can't afford an attorney. That doesn't happen in landlord tenant court, at least not yet. There are attempts to try and make right to counsel or make access to counsel required in this space, but it's another place where we see, um, people falling through the cracks. And then I think this other point, I just wanted to mention that I think even, if people are not experiencing, if people can pay their rent, they're in a house, all these things, we also see habitability as a big issue too, and also impacting health, right? So even if you're living in a house, but if there's mold or there's lead or there's cockroaches or rodents, what is the impact on your health and your quality of living? And all of those things too. And then I wanted to mention also, because I think this is an important part of the housing continuum that I mentioned earlier, home ownership. So New Jersey has one of the highest Black-white wealth gaps in the country. You can see these numbers here. So median household wealth for white families is over 300,000, while the median household wealth for Black and Latina families are 17,000 and 26,000. We know homeownership is the biggest driver of this disparity. Wealth generation is largely tied to family homeownership. And so this disparity sort of, you could see white New Jersey households, statewide homeownership 76.4%, which is double the rates essentially for Black and Latino households. And so when we're thinking of the continuum, obviously there's lots of issues on sort of the extremely low, and even these days in the moderate income categories, but also thinking about how do we move people through the continuum? What do we do to create access to home ownership opportunities for people that have been sort of disproportionately kept out of those markets historically? And so I will pause there. I know I went through this quickly. I know that there are folks who are cycling in, and there was some confusion about the link. So I will pause and see if anybody has any questions about any of this data. I really wanted to just lay out some of the high level things to be thinking about when we're talking about housing, but happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Alex, so much for the presentation. I just had a question about Atlantic County, where we saw the kind of decrease in homeless population counts. As we kind of think about, strategies or ideas, is there a sense of what drove that or what contributed to that? I know in Atlantic City, particularly, there's been a lot of attention paid kind of to this issue. There's a task force, there's a coalition that has been brought together to try and alleviate some of those problems. Is there a sense as to what maybe drove that decrease or what might have looked different in Atlantic County that could potentially be foundational for these discussions?
I think that's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if there's anybody on the call who has a sense of that. Rob, I see you're here. But I'm not positive about the Atlantic County numbers. And I can find out more.
Yeah, no problem. I was just wondering.
I'll just jump in. I'll try to keep my commentary limited. I don't know much about the Atlantic County numbers or their activities, but the challenge when you do point in time, a year-to-year comparison, there could be changes in who counted this year and where they counted last year and things of that sort. We kind of look at the bigger trend and we look at several years at a time. So just the year over year is tough. And then I know for Camden County, we'd like to look closer at the numbers. Where last year we had a decrease, this year we had an increase. But when we look deeper, those who are sheltered, those who are in a shelter, transitional housing, they're also considered homeless. So we had a 60% increase. However, most of it was all within the sheltered population. And there was only a less than 1% increase in the unsheltered population. And most of our efforts have been on creating more shelter, and which is what we're doing today. So we would love to see the overall number go down, but right now managing the unsheltered number is really the shorter term goal. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think that that makes a ton of sense. And maybe I'll look further into that and I can talk to folks at Monarch Housing too, who do the point in time to see. And it might be to Rob's point that looking at sort of, and I put the link in here too for folks who are interested. Monarch does county by county specific sort of breakdowns and overviews. And so you could see sort of within, to Rob's point, like what's happening with the sheltered, what's happening with the unsheltered, what's happening over time. So those are in here too. Ira, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Alex. I just came back from New Jersey League of Municipalities conference, and there was significant discussion and concern on the participants there, the planners, mayors, etc., about this next round of affordable housing requirements. And I didn't know if you could comment on that. But the other thing that came up was there's a group of young professionals who are just starting out, and they're kind of in the gap. They don't fit into the criteria for the affordable housing, but they really can't afford to purchase a home or find other housing. And the comment was they're actually going to Pennsylvania and Philadelphia to find a place to live. And there is going to be, the legislature is going to look at that to change the verbiage to allow this middle income group to also find housing. So just some comments and feedback about what's going on.
Yeah. So I'll take each of those separately. I think I'll take the second question first because it's a shorter answer. So the second question, so affordable housing in New Jersey is actually a very wide range. And I think folks sort of assume affordable housing is for very low income and low income, but it actually goes all the way up to moderate income. And so depending on where you are in the state, and again, I included a link there in the PowerPoint for the affordable housing guidelines, but it could be that you're making, $80,000 a year in certain parts of the state and you would qualify for affordable housing. So it does go up to moderate income. And so some of those young professionals would qualify for that. There's obviously some young professionals, right? If you're living in Jersey City and working in Manhattan and you're making a ton more money, you wouldn't qualify for that. But arguably those folks should be able to, afford some of the other housing options. But I think you're right. I think there's a gap. I think that's why we're also seeing a shift in the landscape of people who support affordable housing, which sort of dovetails with your first question. I think there is sort of, there's obviously local municipalities who have affordable housing obligations that are trying to figure out how to meet those needs. But I also think that what we've seen over time is more support for affordable housing. I think that we are seeing a lot of legislators and people, elected officials and others who are seeing their children, right, graduate from college, get a job and not be able to afford to live in New Jersey. And so I think there's an acknowledgement that we need to do something, that there is a gap in our housing stock, that we don't have enough housing. And in order to do that, we need to build more housing. I think that, obviously, with the Mount Laurel doctrine, there were a lot of years of non-enforcement, so largely under the Christie administration, and we're sort of in the hole that we're in terms of the gap in affordable housing because of that. And so numbers, of units that need to be built when some towns haven't built any, I think, yeah, it's hard. It's a process. But we have such a high need that something sort of needs to be done, right? Like we don't have an option. We need to house people. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I think there's always going to be, whenever you're requiring people to do something, I think particularly in a home rule state like New Jersey, that's difficult and an uphill battle. But we know that the needs are there, and there's flexibility and a lot of flexibility built into the law to allow towns to do and build and develop in a way that makes sense for them to meet those obligations.
I will tell you there was a very strong pushback about it, and the general feeling that I got from multiple sessions that I sat in on was they felt that the design of the Affordable Housing Act was not very well thought out, and they're struggling right now to be able to meet the requirements, and they're especially afraid of the next round of it.
Yeah, so full disclosure, so my previous job was at Fair Share Housing Center, so we were the entity that enforced the Mount Laurel doctrine. We spent over a year working with legislators to write that bill, to come up with a program. I think, you were at the epicenter of opposition, right, at the League of Municipalities. And so I think there's always going to be challenges, right? There are lots of issues that are complex to solve. I don't know whether, right, like there's no sort of crystal ball or silver bullet, like we have to do the work. And while there are some legitimate concerns in certain towns and sort of how to do this and all of those things, the way that the law is designed is to take a lot of that into consideration. And there is sort of flexibility built in. And I think, I think that there are some places and some towns who have valid concerns. I think there are other towns that really just don't want affordable housing in their town. And so they're going to make noise and sort of stomp their feet regardless. And so I think it's, part of navigating that is figuring out like where are the real concerns, what are the real concerns, how can we address them, how can we do better. But I think unfortunately the reality based on history is that some towns just want to stay white and exclusive and not have affordable housing. And so there's sort of, I think both of those pieces are part of that.
Thank you.
Mike, go ahead.
A couple of things. Number one, thank you all for powering through, as they say, the problems this morning getting into the meeting. I apologize for that. I have no doubt that it was my fault. Number two, a reminder to please put your email address in the chat room so that we can communicate with you about future meetings on this subject and others. And finally, I wanted to let you know that we will send you all, if you put your email in the chat, a copy of Alex's PowerPoint. And one final thought, substantively, as I was listening and bringing my own perspective to this, along with all the other issues that we're dealing with, are complex beyond belief, have so many facets, so many perspectives. But one of the things that struck me was the right to counsel for people who are involved in rental housing, which seemed to me the kind of thing that would be easy to understand, has an analog that people appreciate, that is right to counsel in criminal cases, and might be the kind of thing that would fall into a handful of initiatives that NPDC might pursue. Not the biggest target in the world, but something that might actually prove to be helpful and prove to be doable. So just want to toss that out there. And Alex, of course, thank you for doing this for us. We're going to go till 11 o'clock. We will, well, I don't want to promise what we're going to do, but if you folks have thoughts about what we ought to be doing in response to what Alex has said or otherwise, we'd love to hear about it. And if you don't have a chance to tell us today, if you drop us a note, we'll be happy to put it in the mix for future meetings as we evaluate what we can take our limited resources to take on. That's it, Alex. Thanks.
Yeah, and so I'll just say for discussion purposes, I put up here, like, what are you seeing on the ground as the biggest housing issues? Is it availability, the rental market, the for sale market? Are you seeing housing access issues? What are those access issues? Tenant protections, housing support. So we're open to all conversation. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other when we're talking. But Moesha, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Yosha Lawrence. I'm from Parkside Business and Community Partnership in Camden. We're a HUD certified housing counseling agency. So we do a lot of pre-purchase and rental counseling. And it's a twofold issue. And I've been saying this basically since 2021, and the numbers are showing it. Unfortunately, I don't know. My best recommendation is we need a statewide rent control law, because many municipalities in the state do not have rent control on their books. I believe if it's like here in the city of Camden, it's a percentage. Like you cannot increase the rent after on an annual basis beyond a certain percentage. Otherwise, I think it says reasonable increase. And so many times, and what we're seeing now in the pandemic is landlords weren't allowed to do annual increases during the pandemic. Many of them, their tenants did not pay. They might not have income at the time, but it's a catch-22. We understand this is your source of income, but they don't have Kim, so it's cyclical. But so they have decided to increase their rents at astronomical rates. And these smaller municipalities or even some larger ones don't have the rent control on the books. And so tenants are sometimes committing and renewing their leases and then falling behind and ended up in eviction court, or just moving but not being able to find anything because now everyone is increasing their rents. I've seen someone get a rent increase letter for $400. Now that might not seem like a lot, but if you're under the 80% AMI, that is a large increase for a family. And so I think having a statewide law, really, I've said this many times, because I don't want to see someone lose income. I get it, because especially for these smaller landlords, you could have a corporation that has a multi-family complex, but it's become to the point where they're just steady pushing the number up in their mind. Well, I'm going to make sure it's someone who makes enough money. I'm like, this is just unaffordable for anyone. So that's one dilemma. And of course, the second is, I'm glad you guys mentioned the right to counsel, because so many people, once they receive that eviction paperwork, a lot of them just choose to not respond and they move, they leave, etc. If they're able to get something just as much as they get that notice for eviction, at the same time, they're getting a packet of information about, similar to foreclosure. When someone gets a foreclosure notice, they get in their packet here in the state of New Jersey an entire separate list of HUD certified housing counseling agencies saying, if you are behind in your mortgage, reach out to one of these agencies and they will help you. But that's not offered to tenants.
Yeah. I think both of those are really good points. There actually is a statewide rent control law. It just doesn't really do anything. And so I think that it's not significant enough. And then there's a lot of localities, to your point, that have something on the books, but it
Right.
also
Right. That
isn't significant.
right. That's why I
Yep.
said it says reasonable, and then that's at the discretion of the judge. Where if the tenant files the paperwork, that's the other thing. Landlords not if they don't go to court and say, I think this is an unreasonable amount. That's the only
Yep.
way the judge knows. So that's why I was saying having that put in place where and a lot of these landlords don't know the law realities are.
Yep.
But just getting that on the book so people will understand when you see this number, it's unreasonable. You just have to know the ordinance for your municipality. And that's
Yep.
my biggest concern right now.
Yeah. And I think that, I think there's, when I think about rent control, and again, and I'll say that on the statewide level, this is a conversation. People are talking about statewide rent control. I think that there are a lot of challenges in thinking about how do you implement statewide rent control, because we have such a variety of markets in New Jersey. And so I don't think it's impossible. I think that there's a lot of questions and things that need to be thought through in terms of like a policy and how do you do it. And again, there's certainly a conversation among housing advocates at the state level. And I think, to me too, the biggest piece of rent control that I think we miss very frequently with lots of policies is enforcement, right? Like a law is only as good as you're able to enforce it. And so what is the system for enforcement? And there are some jurisdictions in New Jersey that do have stronger rent control ordinances, where they've been a little bit more successful in being able to control the market. But it is definitely a top issue, and similar to right to counsel, that's another one that has bubbled up on the statewide level as well. Any other issues folks are seeing or thinking about that from a region seem actionable or like something that deserves more attention and thought?
Good
Sure, Mike, go
morning.
ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike. I'll wait.
Thanks, Nicole. What about veterans housing, Alex? Is that something that needs to be sort of separated out in some way, or how do we look at that? I mean, I read lots of stuff about the nature, the scope of the problem, but I don't read things that tell me where the entry point to try to help is.
Sure. So, and I'd be curious also if there's other folks on this call that do more with veterans specifically. It's certainly not my area of expertise, but from my perspective, I think that we have focused on veterans quite a bit, both on the state and federal level, right? So veterans often have access to resources that others don't have access to in terms of housing counseling and navigation. And there are specific vouchers that go to veterans, preference for veterans in certain places. And so not to say that that's not a population, right? I think it would behoove us to sort of look at the data and see, like, is there a rise in that specific population that has an increased need? But my sense is that the newer, for lack of a better term, homeless population that we're seeing is not the veteran population. I think we're seeing more young people, families that in previous years wouldn't have been homeless, or experiencing housing instability just because of the rise in the cost of living. And so I think that in turn sort of when we're thinking about policy and systems work, sort of what are the needs? I think it's a shifting population, but would also welcome anybody who's sort of closer to the veteran space or has better insight on that to add their perspective.
One more point in that vein, Alex. Overall, as we look at what we want to come away with in terms of what NPDC will try to pursue on behalf of the nonprofit landscape in South Jersey. We're looking for things also that might be beta tests, things that could be tried somewhere on a limited basis. And if they work, we have some, data to help us make a larger case. So as folks think about what matters, if they could think about those kinds of things, that it seems to be much easier to get somebody, well, we'll test that as opposed to we'll do that statewide. So just a thought in terms of down the road.
Thanks.
Alex, I'll jump in on at least on veterans for now. The DCA does have a major initiative that is coming out. They're currently in they're collecting information process. They're getting feedback right now from the COCs, but they will be unveiling a major plan to, and we're pretty close to ending veterans homelessness in New Jersey. So it's a big initiative, a lot of really to clean up the process. It's not the right language, so please understand my intent, not the exact language I'm using, to help with that process. And then they'll it involves, of course, creating affordable housing. But Michael, to your second point there, some of the counties have other grants. I mean, pilots are difficult with HUD money, but some counties do have their own levy money, and some of them have a homeless trust fund. And I'll speak Camden County itself. We've been playing with pilots of different sorts over the last couple of years. We've invested several $100,000 in the different ideas. So those nonprofits in the homeless space, if you're paying attention in the homeless space, you know that that's what my office has been investing in. So you're certainly always welcome to reach out to me and have that conversation, or at least for Camden County. Other counties may need to be pushed, but those nonprofits in those counties can find them. But we're always open to conversation on who wants to try and do something different.
Thanks, Rob. Mike, go ahead.
Hello, how are you? I'm Mike. I'm from Heart of Camden. So we build affordable housing specifically in Waterfront South in Camden. Good to see familiar faces. Mavis, long time no see. Miosha, my neighbor Portia. So I'm kind of approaching it from the production of affordable housing side. So just two different kind of, policy thoughts that I've been discussing with other colleagues. One is a lot of affordable housing sources at DCA or HMFA currently restrict building housing in a FEMA flood zone, which has a certain logic from a logistical point of view, but at the same time greatly restricts where future housing can occur. So for example, a lot of Camden is in a flood zone. A lot of our neighborhoods, and specifically ours, is primarily in a flood zone. Which doesn't mean that it floods frequently, but it just means it's in a FEMA flood zone. So I've been in discussion with, different sections of Habitat for Humanity that are interested in advocating for neighborhoods with an approved neighborhood plan to be exempt from that restriction. Because for a neighborhood like ours, if we're not allowed to access state funding to build affordable housing, it is essentially redlines the majority of our neighborhood, which means we can't redevelop it per our neighborhood plan. So that's kind of one policy piece to put on the radar. Another question or comment to kind of raise with the group is I'm always curious what different groups' opinions are about the affordability period that goes along with affordable housing. So if I remember right, for Affordable Housing Trust Fund, it's currently around 20 years. I think in the past it might have been 15, depending on other funding sources, it goes up to 30. So I kind of have my own opinions on it, and I'm always curious what other people's opinions are. The longer, I think it also depends on if you're talking rental versus homeownership. For me personally, the longer an affordability period for a rental unit, the better. But for a home ownership unit, I would prefer to see it be shorter. for the purpose of that previous discussion that you were mentioning about the, the wealth gap in the state. So the longer the affordability period, it means that unit is affordable for longer, which is great, but it also means that owner is not able to tap into that equity for a longer period of time. So it delays the equity and the generational wealth that family is able to access. And sometimes it also means that your municipality can also chime in when that affordability period is over and can say whether it can be extended or not, which is also kind of crazy. So I just wanted to raise that as a discussion in case anybody had any thoughts one way or the other on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think the affordability control piece is really important, and is also a part of the gap in affordable housing that we have. So a lot of units that were built 20, 30 years ago are now approaching the end of that affordability control period. That's particularly in a lot of our urban areas. And so, yeah, it's just another issue, right? It's just another contributor. And so, like, what do we do about that? And I think you're right to flag sort of this inverse relationship between rental units and for sale units, right? And like, how do you transfer equity and wealth, but then maintain affordability within the rental space? I think are really important questions. And I've heard about the FEMA issue too. I think, yeah, I think that's a challenge. I mean, I totally get it. I think it's a challenging one. And how do you, yeah, like how do you create places, right? And obviously Camden is in a different situation than places on the Jersey Shore, right? And so I think thinking about like how do you create policy that allows for flexibility in places where it's needed while also protecting communities from flooding and all the things. Before I go to Mavis, does anybody have any response to some of the things Mike threw out?
I think Nicole has a comment, Alex.
Good morning. I'll wait for everyone and I'll go to at the end. We want to hear from everyone. I can wait.
All right, thanks, Nicole. Mavis, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I know we only have a few more minutes, but something that also could be helpful as a group to think through might also be certainly the housing stock issue, but also any thoughts, ideas, solutions that people have around housing, like services around housing that the group might recommend to be bolstered or piloted. For example, I know in Camden City, there's an initiative to kind of reconfigure spaces to co-locate services so that individuals experiencing homelessness don't have to go to all these different spaces to get their needs met. As we all know, transportation in our region is a barrier for a lot of folks. And so I wonder too whether there's space to think about things that we've heard of in other counties or other states that have been supportive, especially in the homelessness space, alongside the real pressing issue of increasing housing stock. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Mavis. Nicole, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My apologies. I'm just able to join in. I wanted to bring out 2 points. The first one is if there's been any conversation around the physically disabled and having access to homes and rental services, housing just overall. Recently, those conversations have come to me. Those who are disabled, and they're not veterans, they've been having some issues with housing. So I was wondering if anyone had any conversations around that. And then secondly, a little bit to what you were saying, Mavis, maybe taking that space. And for example, I lived in Camden. For many years, I raised my family there. So many empty homes. They're just sitting there. So my thinking is maybe there needs to be a conversation around policy after having these homes sit for so long. You know, a nonprofit and a for-profit doing some type of collaboration to get these housings retrofitted, renovated, and then we can just have a conversation around that with it comes to getting some of this housing affordable or accessible to those that are homeless, things of that nature. So I just wanted to put those points out there, just, you know, maybe for the next conversation we can have, or if anyone had some comments around that. I realize we're getting ready to run out of time, but I just wanted to be able to put it in our ear. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, for raising both of those. I think there is definitely some work and there's some state access to resources around the development of vacant homes, and there's some other thinking we can do around that for sure. And then I've noted the sort of supportive housing piece, people with disabilities, and that category too. Rose, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I want to make this brief, but it's certainly a huge conversation. But I represent survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And what happens with this population is that they are more or less becoming homeless because of fleeing abuse, but then they are more or less lumped in with homeless people. There need to be an increase in the number of set-asides that would specifically address some of the needs for homeless people, for survivors who become homeless because of DV. One of the things that happens to them very often is they're sharing residence and have leases under their name where they may not have control over their finances, and then someone leaves and then creates an eviction situation, and that's on their record, making it extremely difficult for them to find something else. But the other part of that is around the finances, where they have not been the primary caretaker in terms of funds, or bringing the primary funds in, and then they become just not able to qualify for the rents that you've been talking about earlier that are just so incredibly high. So just again, to put this in the conversation about the need to do something over and above saying, well, we do have set-asides for homeless people, but it's not specifically for domestic violence because they're just sort of lumped in, and there really just is not enough stock for them. The other piece I would add is just to look at some of these other, we are in Sicklerville. Sicklerville is in the lower end of Camden County. It is, again, not rich in transportation, which is one of the other issues. However, there may be ways to talk to some of the mayors that are in Atco, Berlin, Sicklerville, some of these smaller communities where they may be more open to having developers come in and creating housing stock within those communities. So I just want to put that on the table.
Thanks, Rose. And we're at 11, so I know some folks might have to jump off. If folks can stay on, I can stay on for a few more minutes. I know. Portia, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. I just wanted to see if there's any way an initiative can be started, not only dealing with affordability, but accountability. Many homeowners and renters do not have the experience of home maintenance and budgeting, etc. So this is why a lot of people end up falling behind or having repairs beyond repair and having to leave, etc. So if there was an initiative in place to assist tenants and homeowners who are in affordable housing units, how to take care of them and maintain them, I think you'd see less of a transition.
Yeah, thanks, Portia. I'm going to make note of that. And for all of these things, we're going to have follow-up conversations. So I'm going to take everything that folks have raised today, reorganize, and then we'll sort of dive in a little bit deeper. Yosha, do you want to go before we jump off?
I didn't mean to hit that. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
No,
Okay.
everything that was stated. But I just wanted to, Nicole, I love the idea of you were saying in the city of Camden, taking the abandoned homes. What a lot of people don't realize, that is always the plan, but you have a lot of tax lien and ownership issues, so it's not the easiest process. It can take 5 years to take ownership of a property that's been abandoned with a tax lien and tangled titles. So that is what we do here in Parkside in the city of Camden, and just as well as the other Mike shared for Waterfront South. We both do that, but the whole process of acquiring those properties is a legal nightmare, basically. So it's always, that is always the goal of every organization. So it does happen, and that's happening not just in the city, that's across the state and across the country. Tangled titles, back taxes is always the struggle.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you all for taking the time. Again, apologies for sort of the link challenges getting on, but looking forward to continuing the conversation over time with all of you. And thank you for being with us this morning.
And thank you, Alex, for leading this and agreeing to help us as we go forward. As I told you all, at some point, we will be happy to send Alex's PowerPoint to you if your name and contact information, that is your name and email address, is in the chat. So if it's not, please put it there now. We will be back in touch with you about future meetings on this subject, but we will also let you know about meetings on other subjects that may be of interest to you. As I told you, we've done transportation, employment, faith-based organizations, mental health and substance use, food access, and we have one on health affordability and equality coming up on December 12th. And then we'll move into a whole group of new topics in the new year, but we will be coming back to these topics. We've already had a second session on transportation that Mavis led us in. So thank you for the 24 people who were able to fight through my incompetence in getting the right access information out there. Thank you for doing that. And we will be back in touch. Make sure you're in the chat with your email address. Thank you. And of course, have a great Thanksgiving. Just drop me a note about what time I should be over for dinner. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you all. Yes, great job. Great job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. 2 p.m. Somebody said 2 p.m.
I'll be there. I have to cook for my own family, but I don't want to hang around with them. So I'll come over once I get the food on the table for them.